I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today we are going to talk about an oldie but a goodie, the island of the Blue Dolphins. So many of the American viewers probably have read this book, whether in elementary school or middle school, but this was absolutely a required reading for so many schools back in the 90s, myself included. I personally read this in elementary school, and the reason why I'm bringing this book up today is that I think that it has a lot more to teach us in terms of writing and not just reading comprehension as it was originally intended for. For those of y'all who might not be familiar with this book, or for those of y'all who may have forgotten about this book and, just unearth this little gem from the recesses of your way, way back memories. The story is about a young girl called Wanapale, meaning the girl with the long black hair. And she goes on to say that her secret name is Karana. And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing this right. The book spells them fairly Western style phonetically, so hopefully I'm saying them right. What's so interesting about this book and why I want to cover it today is that the main character, Karana, there is only dialogue at the very beginning of the story. The rest of the book, she's by herself. Because how the story goes is that she lives on this little island known as the Island of the Blue Dolphins with her family and a handful of other villagers. It's a very small island. And one day these foreigners come and take everyone off the island except for Karana and her younger brother Ramo. And the reason for that is that they get accidentally left behind. That her father is the chief, and he decides that they're going to get on the ship with the foreigners and go to a new land with them. The reason for this is because it's a small island, they're running out of resources, they're running out of space. I mean, it's just what happens when you put people in a very small space is that the people keep reproducing and the clan keeps growing, and eventually you outgrow the space that you're in. And that's kind of what happens here. And so everyone gets on the ship, but her younger brother, Ramo, goes back for his fishing hook, which is very near and dear to him. It's his most important object. And so Karana goes back to get him to get on the ship. And they get left behind because the ship is like, there's a storm coming. We cannot wait for you. You're not on the boat, so we have to go. And it's just, I remember 6th grade me was devastated reading that part of the book. Just that her entire family and entire village left her and her little brother behind. He's like 12. She's only like a couple years older than him. She's like 14. So can you imagine that? Just being left alone on this completely deserted island now with your little brother. Just heartbreaking. And this is not a spoiler because it happens so far at the beginning of the book. Her brother dies. And it's really awful. It's pretty gruesome how he dies. It's awful. It's very sad. And so 90% of this book is Karana just being by herself on this island and just having to survive. And the whole time she's on this island, and this is for years, she's by herself. She hopes the ship will come back for her. And the reason why I bring this book up, even though it's very clearly a middle grade sort of story, the text is super easy to read. I'd say this is like anywhere from like a 5th to 8th grade level reading. I'm not so good at judging that, but it's definitely intended for elementary school, middle school age range. We're not making earth-shattering literature here. But in terms of learning from writing as an author, this masterfully handles the fact that we have a character who is by herself on an island. There are no other people for her to interact with. The only other living things on the island for her to interact with are animals. So there's the animals that she hunts for food, there's the animals that she considers her friends, and then there's her mortal enemies, these wild dogs that are just constantly attacking her, attacking the animals that she uses for food, just constantly trying to get into this little like living space that she's created for herself to take her supplies. Like they are like the enemy. They are the antagonist of this story. So the fact that she has no one to talk to, there's like no dialogue in this book, and it is still an incredibly compelling story. This is not a boring story. You are just on your seat. Just every chapter, there's new struggles that she has to face. Sometimes the universe is kind to her and presents her with a bounty, whether it's she is suddenly flush with a particular food resource or she finds something particularly nice aesthetically. In the book, she builds herself a pelt that she turns into a cape that's made out of otter pelts, and she's very proud of it. She has like jewelry that she's made out of like shells and pretty stones, and she like builds this entire living space for herself. Since being by herself, these wild dogs attack her and attack her home, whereas before she had the protection of the whole village. And when you have a big concentration of humans like that, smaller predators like wild dogs are far less likely to attack you and attack your home and your supplies and stuff. So she doesn't have that protection anymore. So she has to like build herself like a little homestead with like a fence and like protections to keep these wild dogs out. And funny enough, she ends up befriending one of the wild dogs. So his name is Rantu Aru, and he becomes her companion, and he basically becomes like the equivalent of like her guard dog and like hunting dog companion. And this is the only like other living creature that she has that she can like, because she doesn't really talk to the dog. Like she just stops talking once everybody leaves and her brother dies. But there's that like nonverbal communication going on with the dog. And so it's just such a fascinating read, rereading this as an adult, and more importantly, rereading this as an author, and seeing how this author successfully wrote an entire story with a main character who is by herself, her against literally the world, her against nature, the great outdoors, going it alone, which is incredibly dangerous. And the fact that she does it without terribly serious injury, she does it without terribly serious illness, the fact that she survives. And spoiler alert, at the end of the book, a different group of foreigners come to the island and they find her, and they are just shocked that she is the only person left on this island. And the fact that she's like a young woman now, they're like, how did you survive by yourself this long? And she ends up packing up her dog and some wild birds that she also captured to be like songbird pets, and just a few other knickknacks that she considers important, and she goes on the ship to go with them to a foreign land. And her hope is to rejoin her family, but she finds out that 10 days into the journey, the boat sank. The boat with everyone she ever knew, her family, the other villagers, only 10 days into the journey, it sank and everyone died. So she truly is the last living person of the island of the Blue Dolphins. And what's more mind-boggling is the fact that apparently this is based on a true story. And unfortunately, in real life, the main character that the person is based on, she dies shortly after being taken to the land with the foreigners from the boat. She dies of illness, which is very common for very isolated peoples like this. Peoples who live, whether it's on an island or they live in a very isolated place like in the jungle or the desert or something. That's why you'll oftentimes see those articles of like places you're not allowed to go. It's these very isolated like village people. If you expose them to illnesses, you could kill the entire village because they have zero immunity, because they just have never been exposed to other people. And that's what happened to her, is she got exposed to other people and had no immunity against basic illnesses and died. So it's a very sad story. It's a very sad book. It's a very sad story. But the reason why I bring this up is that, especially if y'all read this way back in the day, whether you loved it or you hated it or you just didn't care about it, if you're a writer, take a look at this and see how masterfully this author handles having a solitary character that has nobody to interact with and has to rely on interacting with animals and nature itself, the environment itself. It's incredibly challenging to do something like that, and I'm definitely going to be studying more of this, especially for my fantasy settings, to be able to have a much stronger foundation for having that kind of interaction with you against the elements sort of thing. So yeah, it was definitely a blast from the past going back over this book so that I could talk to y'all about it. It was published back in 1993. It is absolutely an oldie but a goodie. It's a fairly short read. It should shouldn't take you too long to get through it, and I highly recommend it as a great reading and writing exercise, or even just reading it just for funsies. It's a great book just for a fun afternoon read. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and if you're new, subscribe. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.